So we got the recording. Just need to go into the website. Go. I added a little bit of new stuff, not to only to the class, but also to the main site. How many people use HTTPS to connect to Moodle? It's not required. You can just use regular HTTP. No one uses HTTPS to connect to Moodle. Okay, if you don't use HTTPS, that means your password is going to be transmitted in plain text. Now, Moodle doesn't really store anything that is that sensitive, so I don't think you have a lot of stuff to get concerned about. However, you can use HTTPS, which is the secure version of HTTP, to connect to Moodle. That way, it will be much more difficult for people to grab your passwords. But before you do that, especially people who want to use Explorer, Internet Explorer, you probably want to read this link here, because it shows you a procedure, basically a process, so that you can do it without Internet Explorer complaining with every single page and complain that the certificate is not signed by a certificate authority. Okay, so this is something that you might want to consider. The other advantage of using HTTPS, which is not relevant for Moodle, is your system administrator would not be able to look at the traffic and know what is being transmitted. So, just highly recommended, not required, but I think it will be a good idea to use HTTPS to log into Moodle. D2L is HTTPS already, by default, and so is IMAIL. Okay. So let's go ahead and take a look at the homework assignment that was due, this morning. And we'll go ahead and do this homework assignment first, then we'll go back and continue to talk about more topics. This is the homework assignment. It is factorial again, but this time it is cleaner. Okay, you can see that the subroutine is shorter, and the trace should also be shorter. I'll save it into today's folder first, so that we don't lose that. Go. And now we can trace the algorithm. Now this algorithm does require more space, horizontally, because some of these return info, is a little bit longer than the previous ones. Okay, so we'll go ahead and get started with this. We have comments, we have line number. There are no global variables anymore. This is good because we have successfully removed all global variables from our programs at this point. The first line that we want to execute is line 9, because that's the first line outside of the definition of a subroutine. Line 9 is, ultimately what line 9 wants to do is to print out a number. But we cannot know what number to print until we have finished the invocation of factorial. So the first thing we have to do is to invoke factorial. When you invoke factorial, it will return values, which means when we get back to line 9, we have other stuff to do on line 9. As a result, you have to use return info instead of return line number in this case. The return info, compared to return line number, is a little bit more complete, because it doesn't only tell you that you have to return to line 9, it also tells you what else you have to do on line 9. So that's why we make a distinction between the return line number, which only tells you which line we are supposed to go back to, as opposed to return info, which tells you which line you have to go back to and what else on that line we have to do. Are there any questions about column C, or why we set up column C the way it is? No questions? Then we can set up the parameter. In this case, factorial only takes one single parameter, which is n. And the value of parameter n is specified by the invoke statement, which is 2. Okay. Is that okay so far? Then we move on and start execution inside the subroutine, starting with the first line. In this case, it is line 3. Line 3 is just asking, is n greater than 0? The answer is true, because column D, which is n, is in fact greater than 0. Then we go to line 4. This is where things start to get a little bit more hairy, because on line 4, we have a return statement that we cannot execute just yet, because it depends on the product between n and the result of the invoke here. So that means we have to invoke factorial first, and then when we come back, we can finish up the multiplication and also the action of returning a value. So that means we have to set up return info again, because we are invoking factorial one more invocation. There's one more invocation of factorial. The return info will tell us where to go back to and what else we have to do on that line. In this case, we have to go back to line 4, and on line 4, there's still the return not done yet, but on top of that, the multiplication by n is also not done. So you got to make sure that your return info looks like this. Do we have any questions about column E or how we set up the return info when we perform that invocation on line 4? Yep.
When you multiply by n, that section, I mean, the way I saw when I was doing homework, I saw the n outside of the brackets, which means it's a different value of n compared to what's inside.
You mean this n here?
Yeah, because, I mean...
This n refers to D, to column D. But we don't...
When I did the homework, instead of putting n, I put 2 in there. The value of n that was previously stored in the...
Okay, that can be technically... It's questionable. Okay, we don't know whether it would take a snapshot of n first. Now, that's because if you... Okay, in this case, it's fine. In this case, n equals 2 because we don't change n in the subroutine factorial. On the other hand, if factorial has n passed by reference as well, then it is possible that by the time you return from factorial, not only does it return a value, but the value of n, this parameter n, can also be changed.
But then the logic would be a little bit different than this, correct?
The logic would be different, but we don't really evaluate it until it is time to evaluate it. You can probably do it as 2, I won't take any points off, but technically speaking, you should still make it just n.
Well, that's what I kind of had a question on the whole, because I saw the line number 4, and I know that it refers to that column D, but I just didn't know whether to put n or 2. So I mean, I have put 2. So
basically, when you see the invoke statement like this, you change only the question. You change only the invocation to a question mark. Everything else should remain intact, the same as before. So that's a general rule that will be valid for all cases. When you replace this n with a value of 2, it is okay in some cases, but it's not correct in some other cases. So that's a very good question. Does everybody else get the understand the answer? Okay, when you have an invoke inside of a statement, and you want to specify the return info, what you should do is just to replace the invoke itself with a question mark and leave everything else on that line the same way as before. Is that okay so far? Okay, that's a very good question. I'm glad you brought it up. Okay, but we also have to set up parameter n, because every time you invoke factorial, you have to set up parameter n. In this case, f corresponds to the right-hand side of the right arrow, n minus 1, which is on the left-hand side. This n refers to column D, because it has to be a value that we already know. So this n has a value of 2, 2 minus 1 is 1, and therefore column F will start with a value of 1. Are we doing okay so far with column F, why it has a value of 1? Okay. Now once we set up the columns, we continue execution in the subroutine that we're invoking, starting from the very beginning again. So this time we start with line 3 again. And this part, I think most people do not have a problem with, because from the previous homework assignment, I can see that people do not have a problem with recursion, as in where do we start when we perform a recursive call. The problem with the previous assignment is what do we do with passing by reference. That was the main issue with the previous assignment. Okay, so n is greater than 2 is Still true, because n has a value of 1. So we move on to line 4 again. And this time, because the reasoning is exactly the same, I will just copy and paste, so we don't have to just work on it line by column. And I'm going to move my columns like this. And then we go all the way back to the beginning of factorial again, on line 3. This time when we ask the question, is n greater than 0, the answer is false. N is not greater than 0 anymore. So we have to go to the else case, which is on line 6. On line 6, all we want to do is to return a value of 1. When we return a value, what you do is you copy and paste the return info cell, change the question mark to whatever value we are returning. In this case, it is 1, and you're done. You do not evaluate what is 1 times n at this point. All you're doing is to fill in the blank. That is it. Are there any questions at this point? No questions? Okay. After line 6, we get out of the conditional statement, and then we get all the way to line 8, which is the end of the subroutine. At the end of the subroutine, we have to do several things. One is to look up return info. It tells us we have to go back to line 4. And when we do get back to line 4 looks like this. And then the second thing we have to do is to deallocate these columns. So we'll indicate that these columns are now deallocated. And we have to look at, which one again? Font effects. And strike through. So now we're back to line 4. But when we get back to line 4 does not look like this line 4 anymore, because we just resolved what the invocation is returning. So at this point, okay, just to answer your question, at this point we evaluate what is 1 times n. Because there is a slight chance, not in this program, but there is a slight chance in some programs that the value of n can be changed in between. So at this point we evaluate what is 1 times n. Obviously, we cannot be talking about n of column H because that is already deallocated. So when we talk about 1 times n, we must be referring to column F, which has a value of 1. 1 times 1 is 1. So when we get back to line 4, we execute return 1. Are we doing okay so far with why we're executing return 1 at this point? What do we do when we execute return 1? We copy and paste the return info cell, change the question mark to the value that we are returning, which in this case is just 1. So that's what we are doing. We take the return info cell, we copy and paste it, and then we change this question mark to a 1. Are we doing okay so far? Because this is the part that can be confusing. The confusion is coming from the fact that the return info itself, by itself, is also a return statement. But that really should be irrelevant, because the action of executing a return statement is just to copy and paste and replace the question mark. I don't care what is in the return info cell. Is that okay? I mean, is everybody doing okay with this part? Okay. After line 4, we get out of the conditional statement. We go all the way to the end of the subroutine, which is on line 8. Line 8 is the end of the subroutine. We have to say we are supposed to go back to line 4 according to our return info cell. And then we will say that these 2 columns are no longer in use. In this case, I can just copy and paste it like that. And now we are back to line 4 again. But this time when we get back to line 4 looks like this. Okay, we execute return 1 times n. We have to find out which n we are talking about. We cannot be talking about column F or H because they are deallocated already. So at this point, only column D is n. So 1 times n is 1 times 2, which is 2. In other words, at this point, row 16 of the trace, we execute return 2. To execute return 2 means you have to copy and paste the return info cell, change the question mark to the value that we're returning, and that's it. That is the action of executing return 2. Then we go to line 8. On line 8, we have to look up the return info column and say, okay, we have to go back to line 9. So this is what we do. We just say we have to go back to line 9 after this, and then it's time to deallocate those 2 columns. By the time we get back to line 9 does not look like this anymore, instead it looks like this. We know exactly what value we're supposed to print, and we just go ahead and perform that action. And there is nothing else after this line, post, and we are all done. Do we have any questions about this trace? No? It's all good? Yep.
I forgot that I put my computer line 8, but then 9.
Are you talking about row 8 or line 8 of the
No,
program?
it's row 16.
Row 16. Okay,
Yeah.
very good.
I thought that I forgot that it's line 4 and I put like 9 and
You forgot.
to go on line 4 and just printed 9 and 9.
Okay, well, I have to look at your submission, when I grade it. But this is the answer. Okay, what you should do, even before I grade it or give you, a point values for your submission, is you should go ahead and compare my solution to yours and see whether they are, the same or not. If they are not the same, you want to, at least, think about why are they not the same, and, basically just. In your mind, you have to understand, why it is supposed to be like this. Okay. Are there any questions about this particular assignment? Fairly short. We have 19 rows in the trace, and it's not a very long program to trace, but it does exercise, the concept in a way that, if anyone has any confusion about returning a value, this will expose it, which is the whole purpose of assignments, is to expose, any particular or potential misunderstanding of the concepts. Yep.
I just had a question about the algorithm. Would it work the same if you just said if 10 is greater than 1? Because
Yes, it would. But by definition, it is 0. It has to do with what, if you don't have anything, then when someone asks you how many ways can you arrange nothing? And the answer is there's one way to arrange nothing. It's a mathematical thing, it's functionally, yes, functionally you can just, change the conditional statement here and say if n is greater than 1, then do the recursion. If not, just return 1. So you're absolutely right about functionally. It is, it can be done that way.
So there's instances where we may need that 0.
No, because if you say if n is greater than 1, then do this, otherwise return 1, then when you say, what is the factorial of 0, it will still give you the correct answer. But in that case, your algorithm, well, I suppose it will still be functionally the same as the mathematical definition. But when you look up the definition of factorial using, any type of source, it will tell you that 0 factorial is 1, and then everything else can be recursively defined after that. So that's why I follow exactly the mathematical definition in this subroutine.
Okay.
Yeah, but you're right. You are correct. Let me show you this part here, because it shows here that 0 factorial is 1, and that's the base case. This is the smallest number that we know. And there has to be a recursive definition here too. Let me try and look for that. See, this is exactly what what the algorithm is trying to reflect, is the mathematical definition of factorial.
Okay, so we just did it that way, so we're doing it based off the definition of factorial.
Yep. Mm-hmm. Exactly.
But like in an actual program, I could just do 1. It's
Yes.
not necessary.
Functionally, it would.
Column G.
Exactly. Functionally, it will be exactly equivalent. Yep. Mm-hmm. Any other questions about factorial? Yes?
Not about factorials. Does your calc spreadsheet doesn't also do merge cells?
Say again?
Merging cells.
Merging cells?
Yeah.
I did not do it this time. You don't have to.
I was like, for some reason on mine, it's like.
It's because I turn on edit recording, and once I turned it on, you cannot merge the cells. But as long as it's clear, as long as the axis, or whatever symbol you choose to use to indicate columns are deallocated, as long as it spans over the columns that need to be deallocated, that's fine. Okay. Question?
Yeah, I have uploaded the folder from last week, and I can open 3 folders.
3 folders.
two of them it was like C++, but it's okay. And another one it was, I don't know, I think maybe the last.
Can you speak up a little bit? I cannot. Go ahead.
I tried to open this folder.
It's a zip file. Okay. And when you open up the zip file, it gives you this.
Yeah.
Return.c and return.
Yeah.
Return
Yeah.
C and return I cannot open, and also I cannot open.
Return.c is a text file. You should use a WordPad to open it because it's a text file that is edited in Linux. So when you open it in Windows, use WordPad to open it. Return is an executable that is only executable in Linux. So that's why you cannot open it.
And this one, the lock after live return.
Oh, that's only because when I created the zip file, I was still editing live after return, and that's why it's just a temporary file that is there. Because when I took the snapshot, I have not closed that particular document yet.
So it has the other one locked. It has life after return ODS locked.
It has it locked.
Yeah. So when you try and open it, it wants to open it as read only. At least that's what it was on mine.
Not here. Is that read only?
Well, you're the one that has
You're
it
the one
locked.
that has a lot.
So for you, it's not read only.
No, but I've opened it inside the zip file, and I have since deleted that whole folder, so I don't really have the lock anymore. I
Read
think
only on my system.
Okay, when you do it, did you try to open it inside the zip file, or did you extract everything first and then open it?
I unzipped everything.
You unzip everything? If you unzip everything, you should delete the log file first and then try to open the document. It should work in that case. Because that's exactly what it's doing right now. Is I'm opening it inside the zip, inside the zip utility program, which means when you open it inside OpenOffice at this point, it cannot actually see the log file, and that's why it is not locked. Okay. Any other questions about the files from last time? No questions. Okay.
What happened to the second part of lecture?
Yeah, it's not on the YouTube.
We talked about it twice already this morning.
Third time's a charm.
Yeah, third time is a charm. I could have said, just watch the video recording of this morning to find out what happened to the recording. Hey, we are, after all, we are talking about recursion, right? I mean, we should apply recursion as many times as we want. I lost the recording because when I thought I uploaded it, and then I deleted the file because I need the space on the flash drive, and as it turned out, the upload was unsuccessful along with another video clip that I also captured, not for this class, so it was lost basically. But you can also you can also watch the video recording of my Tuesday Thursday class because we covered the same material in both classes. So in case you want to find out you have time to watch the other class, that's something that you can do too. Okay. Any other questions?
What's the name of will be same name?
It will be basically the same name, just different dates. Tuesday, Thursdays. Look up a calendar and find out what dates are. What are the dates of Tuesday and Thursdays? The two classes are fairly synchronized. The other class is maybe a little bit ahead of this class, so you probably want to look at maybe Tuesday for this week, and possibly Thursday of last week of the other class. So you go to YouTube, search it the same way, cisp300, and then followed by the date code, 2011 03 24 0322 or something like that. And once you look at the beginning of a lecture and look at the end of a lecture, you can probably by deduction you can find out whether that's the right day or not. If it is not the right day, if it is like before or after the topic, you just kind of do a little search on the other direction.
I checked my email this morning and they said they increased the tuition to 36.
Yes.
Did they cut any more classes, or are they going to?
Yes, we are cutting classes, but it's not as bad as 16.5%. It is 7% for the fall. It is still significant. It is still very significant because as of this semester, I think the college district is already underserving the population by some I think it was about 1,000 or 1,500 students. So we are already not having enough classes to serve everybody. With a 7% reduction of FTEs, that number will go up. We'll basically not be able to serve as many students as of last fall. It's already tight this semester, so in the fall it's going to be even bad, even worse, unfortunately. And if we don't get the mid-year special election about the extension of the taxes, if that does not go through, I think we'll see a mid-year cut of some sort, which means spring 2012 is going to be really bad, because the current budget is based on having that tax available, I think. And if that tax turns out to be not available, then the colleges won't be funded the way they expected to be funded. So that means they would have spent the money, they would have spent too much money by fall 2011 already. Then comes spring 2012, they will have to cut even more classes to make up for the difference.
They increase the tuition if they have to cut more in spring.
Increasing tuition does not help that much. Does not really help that much. I think for each student, the state actually has to pay more than $1,000 for each student enrolled in a class. I think on the average. Okay, I don't remember the average number of units that people take, but the amount is quite a bit more coming from the state than from your own pocket. So changing that $10 is not going to help that much.
Plus, like 3/4 of the students here are on the bog, and so they don't even pay that $36.
Exactly. The people who actually have to pay more are the people who are not, on financial aid or any of those programs. So the actual amount that is generated because of this fee increase is not that much. Yep.
But at least, weren't they talking that it could have been 64?
Yeah.
They were talking it might have jumped
I
to
think
$64, so I think $36 is.
I think I think Yuba College has already increased the fee to more than that. No, it's more than $26. It's in the latest news. I cannot remember.
There it is, $60.
$60. Okay, there you go. So apparently, not all colleges, have to have the same per unit price. So Yuba College has bumped theirs up all the way to $60 per unit, and with Los Rios, we are running at $36 per unit. So it's still reasonable. I would not say $36 is really, too much, but it's definitely moving in the wrong direction. That's for sure. Any other questions about fall? I mean, the good thing is we have not cut back on any CISP 360 classes. So the class that is after this one, that most people would have to take because you're here because of CISP 360, that class has not been cut back. So we are still offering the same number of classes in CISP 360 as this semester, the previous semester, and 1 year ago. So that has not seen any cuts yet. Any other questions?
How about 310?
How about 310?
Yeah.
310 is already being offered once a year or every 2 semesters. They cannot cut that back anymore. That class typically, optimally, should have 25 to 30 students per class. I have 45 now. And it's different when you have 45 students in a class that originally should have about 25 students. It does move a little bit slower than before. Okay, any other questions? But you cannot take 310 until you are done with 360. So if for you guys, most of you should be able to take CISP 310 by spring 2012, because you will have to take CISP 360 first in fall 2011. But the spots will be gone quickly. I believe there's only one fully face-to-face section. Is the schedule out yet? No?
It won't be out till April 4th.
Till April 4th? Okay. So I won't see you guys until then. I think there's one fully face-to-face section for CISP 360 The other two are hybrid, so partly online and partly face-to-face. And I can tell you right away, the face-to-face one will be gone in no time. The moment it opens up, it's gone. Yep.
Everyone should update their supplemental enrollment forms after class today.
What is that?
It's something you have to do before you can register.
Verify your name.
Okay.
Yeah.
All right.
First chance to do it is today. You better
Okay.
do it fast.
All right. Good tip. You can use the lab to do it. Just walk over to room 152, and do that. So that on next, what is 4th? What is the 4th? Is it Monday?
Monday.
So on Monday, you'll be ready to sign up. It depends on your priority group too, right? Yep.
You can't sign up on Monday, but they're
Oh, no.
releasing the
That's when they
schedule,
release
so
the
you
schedule.
can look at when
Okay.
they're gonna be available.
Sign up is on like May 2nd.
May 2nd? Okay. That depends on your priority too.
Yeah, it's May 2nd to like May 20th or, yeah.
Yep.
Why do the face-to-faces go quicker than the hybrids? Is that like a psychological thing, or is it?
No, I think most people just realize that with programming classes, face-to-face are far more effective than, hybrid. Which is also partially why ARC classes are more, we articulate with more colleges and universities than, say, CRC, because CRC has more fully online programming classes. It's not even hybrid, it's fully online. And, it's much more difficult to learn from a fully online programming class. Okay. Any other questions? No other questions? Okay. All right, so now we're back to the class material. Do you guys want to have more examples with passing by reference? Or are we ready for another homework assignment that has passing by reference?
More examples.
More examples? Okay, very good, we can do that.
We're having an exam next week.
We're having a practice exam next Friday.
Oh, practice exam next week.
And then we'll have an actual exam the Friday after next Friday, which is right before spring break, which I think is better than right after spring break. Oh, make sure I save it. Yep, there you go. Okay, so more examples with passing by reference. Let's go ahead and do that. Let's see. We have already done swap, so that's already a done deal. Let's do one that is kind of combining certain concepts. Okay, we can do that. Okay. I'll call this subroutine one pass. Okay, and it's going to combine the concept of arrays with the concept of passing by reference. Okay. Which in this class, I think this is the first time. Have I ever talked about the combination of those two? No? Okay, this would be a good, this would be the first time. So I will pass by reference A, which is an array, and I will pass by value a particular number. I'll just call it B, okay, for the lab. Okay, and then what we'll do is, this is the subroutine. We have a local variable I, and here's the subroutine. As long as, let's see, do I need an I here? Probably don't need even a local variable I, so let's get rid of that guy. Okay, we'll say as long as B is less than bar A bar minus 1, we'll do the following. The following is if A bracket B is, let's see, I need to, is greater than A bracket B plus 1, then we want to swap those two. To swap those two, we'll need, okay, we have to have a local variable T. Then we'll go through the swap sequence, which means T gets A bracket B gets A bracket B plus 1, and then A bracket B plus 1 gets T. And if B gets B plus 1, and while, and define sub. Now we go back and fix all the indentations. Okay, go, and one more. Okay, so this is my algorithm. It is called one pass because this is what bubble sort does with one pass. And we'll just go ahead and in the main program, we'll just say invoke one pass. I use array X to specify array A and this to specify parameter A, and I would use say 1. Well, let's put 0. Use 0 to specify B. That's my algorithm. It is an extension to the concept that we know already, but at the same time, it should be a good refresher of the concept of passing by reference. Except in this case, we are dealing with an array instead of a single variable. And here we trace it in sheet 2. We need comments because we are going to have conditions to evaluate. And then we have line number. There's one global variable, so I do have something to say about the precondition. The global variable is variable x, which is an array. And let's just say that x has 3 elements. I will just use this to indicate the elements of x. So x in this case has 3 elements. And we'll give these specific values because otherwise I cannot perform the subroutine call. We'll just have this being 3, this being 1, and this being 2. This will trigger 2 swap operations. Now we are ready to actually execute the program. On line 14, we have to invoke the subroutine. We have to invoke the subroutine one pass. It does not return a value, which basically means that we can use return line number instead of return info. The return line number is post because there are no additional lines after line 14. Then we have to set up all the parameters as well as all the local variables. We have A, which is passed by reference. Now this time it is kind of interesting because I'm not using a single variable this time. X here is an array. So A, which is a pass by reference parameter, becomes an alias of all 3 columns of that array. In other words, it is also known as column C to column E. Are we doing okay so far with the extension of the concept of passing by reference? Instead of being a reference to one single column, it is considered as a reference to multiple columns. In other words, before we have a little call number to refer to a single book in the library on a shelf. Now we have a call number that corresponds to the entire shelf in the library. But it is still just a reference number. It's just a call number. And parameter B starts with a value of 0 because that's exactly how it is specified. And then we need one more thing, which is T, our local variable, which starts with an unknown value. Are there any questions about how columns F to I are set up? Nope. Okay. Now we go into the subroutine starting on line 5. Line 5 is asking, is B less than bar A bar minus 1? Okay, B is 0. Bar A bar is basically bar X bar. Bar X bar is 3. 3 minus 1 is 2. 0 is less than 2 is true. We move into the loop. We go to line 6. Now this one is a little bit more tricky because now we are not just looking at the size of the array that A refers to. It is looking at individual elements of A, which is a reference to an array. Okay, let's take a look at A bracket B first. Okay, first thing first. A is an array. A is a reference to column C to column E, which is otherwise also known as X. B, on the other hand, is a pass by value parameter. It has a value of 0 at this point. In other words, the first part of the comparison is referring to A bracket 0. But since A is really this particular array here, A bracket 0 is the same as X bracket 0, which has a value of 3. A bracket B plus 1 refers to A bracket 1 because B is 0, but A bracket 1 is the same as X bracket 1, which has a value of 1. Is 3 greater than 1? Yep, it is. So what we need to do is to say that the result of the comparison is true. And as a result of that, we have to continue execution on line 7. Line 7 is the beginning of the swap sequence. This is something that we have seen already. T gets A bracket 0. A bracket 0 is X bracket 0, which has a value of 3. On line 8, A bracket 1, or X bracket 1, which has a value of 1, is copied to A bracket 0. So A bracket 0, which is X bracket 0, now gets a value of 1. On line 9, A bracket 1, which is X bracket 1, gets the value of T, which is 3. Are we doing okay so far with this? Yep.
Can you spell line 9 one more time?
Line 9.
Yes.
Okay, T is our local variable, which has a value of 3.
No, I mean line 9 on the
Row
second
9?
sheet. Yeah.
Okay, row 9 of the trace is corresponding to line 8 of the pseudocode. The right-hand side is A bracket B plus 1. B is 0, so this is actually referring to A bracket 1. A bracket 1 is the same as X bracket 1 because A is a reference to the same 3 columns. X bracket 1 has a value of 1. We are putting that into A bracket B. B is 0, so we are storing it into A bracket 0. But A is nothing more than a reference to some other columns. And that's why we store it in X bracket 0, because A is a reference to the same 3 columns. Okay? We do not store anything if a parameter is passed by reference. We don't change that column, period. Okay, which is a common mistake from the previous homework assignment, from the homework that was due last Friday. Quite a few people changed the column of a pass by reference parameter, which is not the right thing to do. You have to change the column that your pass by reference parameter is referring to. So that's exactly what we're doing here, is we're changing the column that the parameter refers to. Is that okay? So after line 9, we get out of the conditional statement. All we have to do is to add 1 to B on line 11. So B goes from 0 to 1, and then we go back to the beginning of the loop on line 5. B is less than bar A bar minus 1 is still true because B has a value of 1. Bar A bar is the same as bar X bar, which is 3. 3 minus 1 is 2. 1 is less than 2 is true. We go to line 6 again. This time we are comparing A bracket B, but B is 1 at this point, so we are comparing A bracket 1, which is the same as X bracket 1, to A bracket B plus 1. And because B is 1, B plus 1 is 2, so we are comparing to A bracket 2, which is the same as X bracket 2. And the answer is still true, because we are comparing X bracket 1, which has a value of 3, to X bracket 2, which has a value of 2. 3 is greater than 2 is true. So now we move in to line 7. We go through the same sequence, the same swap sequence. We take the value of A bracket 1, which is X bracket 1, which is now 3. We put it into local variable T, and we go to line 8. We copy the value of X bracket 2 to X bracket 1, because A bracket 2 is the same as X bracket 2. A bracket 1 is the same as X bracket 1. So we copy the 2 over to here. And then on line 9, we take whatever we saved earlier in variable T and put it into X bracket 2. And that completes the swap sequence. Are we doing okay so far? Okay. After line 9, we get out of the conditional statement. We go to line 11. Line 11 is going to bump up the value of B by 1. So B goes from 1 to 2. And then we go back to the very beginning of the loop again, which is on line 5. And this time, B already has a value of 2. Bar A bar is 3. 3 minus 1 is 2. 2 is less than 2 is false. So we get out of the loop. We end up on line 13. Line 13 is the end of the subroutine. So the first thing we do is we look up return line number. That reminds us to go to post next. Then we have no need of column F to column I anymore. So those columns are now marked as deallocated. That's it. That's the end of the trace. So the key point here is when you look up column G, which is the parameter that is passed by reference, there's no update operation here. Instead, whatever it refers to, column C to column E, these three columns did get updated in the process of executing the algorithm. Are we doing okay so far with the concept of passing by reference? Is that good? Okay. So let's go ahead and save this, and we'll just call this exactly one pass. There we go. More examples. Okay, so this one is, the next example is also kind of tricky in a way, but it's also useful in many other ways. It's because it corresponds to a equivalent concept in C and C++ programming. It's called auto-increment. It's also called post-increment. When you move on to cisp300, you will see this again, except it will be in the form of an operator instead of in the form of a subroutine. But I will use a subroutine to illustrate exactly the same concept. Define sub, post increment. This is interesting because we have one single by reference parameter, which I will call x here. At the same time, I have a local variable t. The first thing we do is we take a snapshot of the value of x and save it into t. And then the next thing we do is to say x gets bumped up by 1, x gets x plus 1. But at the same time, the subroutine will return the value. It returns the old value of x before the increment, which is saved in t. Okay, so this is a neat combination of the concepts that we have talked about so far, because it has both passing by reference and also at the same time returning a value. Okay, so the question now is, does it really change anything that we have learned so far? Or is the behavior of this program still consistent with everything that we have talked about? It's just that it combines the two concepts into one single subroutine. Well, let's go ahead and find out what happens here. I'll define the subroutine that I call stub, because the whole purpose of stub is to test the concept of post-increment. And in stub, I will have my local variable that I call I, doesn't matter what it is. And I'll just say that I is initialized to 0 to begin with. And I'll say print invoke post increment and use I to specify parameter x. And I'll do it again. The second time we do it, it should be fairly boring already, but we'll go ahead and do that anyway. And we'll do one more thing. We'll just print the value of I in the third print statement and define sub. In the main part of the program, all we have to do is to invoke the stub subroutine. So this is the new test, okay, to see whether we understand the individual concepts and not let them confuse us when they're combined. So let's go ahead and give this one a shot. This concept, yep.
Are you going to give us like a pre
Practice test?
Yeah.
Next Friday.
Next Friday?
Yeah.
So the test isn't until the Friday after?
Yes.
I thought it was next. Okay. Never mind.
Right before the break.
Okay.
Yep. All right. So now we are going to track this program down and see what it does. We have comments because we have to print some values later on. We have line number. There are no global variables in this case. We start with line 15, which invokes the stub subroutine. The stub subroutine does not return a value, so what we need is just a return line number to post. But it also has a local variable I, which always starts with an unknown value. So this is how we set up the columns for stub. Then we will be ready to get into stub. When we get into stub, line 10 is the first line that we have to execute. I gets a value of 0. And then we move on to line 11. Line 11 wants to print something. But we don't know what to print yet because the whatever value is supposed to print is the return value of invoking post increment. Well, that's okay because we can just go ahead and invoke post increment first to find out exactly what we are supposed to print. When you invoke post increment, because it returns a value, that means you have to use return info instead of return line number. When we come back from post increment, we want to go back to line 11 because there's unfinished business on line 11, which is just printing out whatever is returned to the print statement. But you also have to supply x, which is passed by reference, and you also have to specify what is t, which is just a local variable. T is easy because it is a local variable. We can figure it out later. What is x? X is passed by reference, and we use I to pass to x. Where is I? I is in column D. So that means x as a passed by reference parameter is going to be an alias of exactly the same column, which is column D. So let me just stop here and make sure that everybody is okay with the trace up to this point. Is that okay so far? Does it conflict with anything that we have talked about so far? The mechanisms of invoking subroutines, the mechanism of passing by reference, the mechanisms of dealing with a subroutine that can return a value. Are we still doing everything the same way as before? Yep. Okay. Very good. Just want to make sure that you guys realize that we haven't really changed any rules. It's just a new way to combine those particular concepts. On line 4, we take a snapshot of x, into t. In other words, we find out what is x. X is a reference to column D. Column D has a value of 0, so my local variable t will store exactly the same value. On line 5, it increments x by 1. What is x again? X is a reference to column D, and column D is now incremented to 1. Are we still doing okay? Okay. Now we move on to line 6. What does line 6 do? Line 6 returns the value that we store in T. T has a value of 0, so line 6 is effectively returning 0. When we return a value, we look up the return info cell, we copy, we paste, we change the question mark to whatever value we are returning. In this case, it is 0. Then we go to line 7, which is the end of the subroutine. At the end of the subroutine, we look up return info, which reminds us we have to continue execution on line 11 next. Then we have no use of these 3 columns anymore, and we go ahead and deallocate these 3 columns. When we continue execution on line 11, it looks like this, which basically means that we have to print a value of 0. We move on to line 12. Line 12 is invoking the same thing, so we have to set up the columns exactly the same way as last time. Except the return info is not returning to line 12, it's not returning to line 11, it's now returning to line 12. But the way we set up everything is exactly the same. We continue execution inside the subroutine starting on line 4. Line 4 is copying the value of x to t, but x is passed by reference. It does not really have a value on its own. It refers to column D. Column D at this point has a value of 1, and that's why local variable t will have a value of 1. We move on to line 5. Line 5 is incrementing x by 1. Once again, x is referring to column D, and column D is the one that is incremented by 1. We go to line 6. Line 6 returns the value stored in T. T has a value of 1 at this point. We're executing the statement of return 1, which means we copy and paste the return info cell, change the question mark to a 1, and we are done with the return statement. Then we go to line 7, which is the end of the subroutine. At the end of the subroutine, we have to look up return info cell and say, oh, we have to go back to line 12. Okay. Then we have no use of those 3 columns anymore. And in this case, I can just copy and paste these 3. Then we continue execution on line 12. Line 12 now looks like this, which is E17. All it has to do is to print a value of 1. But you can see the value that you print is actually 1 less than the value stored in I, and that's why this is called post increment. Okay, post increment means you utilize the value of the variable before the increment. and the increment is done after you utilize the value of the parameter. And now we are back to line 13. Line 13 is going to print the value of I itself, which at this point is 2. So we go ahead and print the value of 2. And now we are at the end of the stub subroutine on line 14, which means we have no use. We look up the return line number to understand that we have to continue on post. Then we have no use of these 2 columns anymore. Copy, paste, and strike through. And we are technically done. This particular subroutine, when you look at the source code, when you look at the pseudocode, this subroutine that I call post increment is actually the post increment operator in C and C++, which is actually C, which is I++. Okay, if you want to do a post increment on I, it is I++. But the subroutine does exactly the same thing, and you will see this concept again in cisp300. The concept of post increment is used also in most C-derived languages. So that means C, C++, Java, PHP, Perl, they all have the same operator, which is just the plus operator after a variable. Any questions at this point? No? Is it too boring? I mean, no?
Seems fine. It doesn't seem too complicated.
Okay. Well, in this class, we don't design new algorithms. I'm not going to ask you guys to write your own subroutines. And what we do in this class is trace subroutines that I define and make sure that you guys know exactly what to do on each and every single line, so that when you move on to cisp300, when you actually have to write programs, you already understand all the available tools and all the available components, and then it becomes a matter of how do we put everything together, knowing what each component does. Okay. Any other questions about this? Any additional questions about returning values? Anything about subroutines? Passing by value, passing by reference, local variables, and returning values. Yep.
Do you have anywhere like I guess almost like a definition of terms or whatever, so that we can look so that it says when you see by reference it means this, when you see return it means this.
I have this. This is basically the new and refined notes on all the concepts that we have talked about.
Okay.
Yeah. So basically, if you see a link in Moodle, in a topic that we are currently talking about, you are expected to have read all those topics before or after taking the class, after the lecture. So when you look at Moodle, this is the topic that I have highlighted at this point, and we have finished every single one of these links already. And so that's basically where the material is coming from, is basically all the notes that are linked from inside that topic. It takes the role of a book. It's not printed, but you can print it out if you want to. Has anyone printed out these things?
Yeah.
You do?
I
Is it easy to read on paper?
I'm
Sort of?
going back and forth. Now
Okay.
I'm deciding I like the HTML version better on screen.
Okay.
Because when you do the tracing and you print it out, sometimes it'll print on opposite sides of the paper or whatever, and it's
Okay.
it doesn't lay out as nicely as on the HTML.
Okay. Well, the nice thing of printing it out is you can highlight it and add your own
So
notes
I'm
to
doing
it.
both.
Okay. Any other questions? No other questions? Now, I know that you guys are kind of getting bored or tired of these topics, so I'll just go ahead and talk about something else. I saw a few of my other students use what is called a live scribe device. It's a pen. Okay. Now I do not I don't own any stock in this company directly, and they don't have any kickback for me. I don't even own a pen like this because it doesn't have a driver for Linux. Okay. So, but I am telling you, what other students have been telling me. So I'm just doing the relay thing here. What this is it's a pen. It's a little bit thicker than a normal pen. I would say it is about the same size as a dry bar marker. But it does work as a regular pen on special papers. Okay, and I suppose instead of playing the video here, which is basically all commercial, I can just describe the concept. When you buy a pen like this, it is fairly expensive. The cheapest one is $100. But what it is a recorder. And on top of a recorder, it can also record your handwriting. But you have to do your handwriting on special paper that you can also purchase from this company. What it does is the paper has micro dots that your eyes cannot easily pick up. If you use a loop or a magnifying glass, you can actually see the little dots. But the pen has its own camera, pretty much to the tip of the pen itself, and it can see all those dots. So as you write, it will pick up the dots and understand exactly the position of the pen relative to the piece of paper. And every piece of paper in a binder is unique. It has its own code. So the pen, when you write on a piece of paper in the binder, it automatically understands which page it is on in the binder. So as you write, it will record your handwriting. But the microphone will also record whatever is going on, in terms of audio around the pen. One of my students, took this, to take notes in cisp300, which is the assembly programming class, and he sits, pretty much, relative to this classroom, maybe the second last row, close to the aisle. And when he replayed the audio, and the pen, actually has a tiny little speaker to replay, so you don't have to plug in a headphone to listen to it. It was not bad. It was able to pick up my voice when the student was, pretty much, at the middle part of the entire classroom, which I think is pretty good. Most microphones cannot do that because my voice does not project either, and it was able to pick up my voice, and he was able to replay it. But it can capture anything that you write on the paper, and you can either print it out, or you can just, make it play back the handwriting, with the audio, basically stroke by stroke. Yep.
It also links up exactly what you're writing at a particular time with the audio itself.
Yes.
So I can go back on my Windows and
Yes.
click on a certain part of my notes, and it instantly brings me back to what you were talking about.
Yes. Yeah, it does that. But they don't have that software in Linux, and that's why I still do not own one. If they had it, with Linux, I would have owned one. I think last year.
They said they're not releasing it anytime soon, though.
Yeah. Well, anytime soon is anytime soon. I want it now. But until they have it, I'm not gonna buy it because without Linux, I will have to use it inside a Windows emulation program, and I don't want to do that. I mean, I want these people to recognize Linux as an alternative, as a viable alternative desktop. So until they make it, I'm not gonna buy it. But it's something that can be useful in classes. I have several students telling me that it has been very helpful in classes. Not only because of the recording part, only because of the voice, but also everything that you write on paper is also captured. So but it does not capture the screen capturing that I capture in the class. So if you combine the two, then you got everything. You have everything that you wrote on your binder, and also everything that I do with the whiteboard or the projector. So that would be everything is now digitized. Then I want to bring you to another website, because with all these digitized stuff, and you're not even home most of the time, where do you store all that stuff? This is potentially one place to do it. It's Amazon.com. Yeah, most people think of Amazon.com and say, oh, they sell books. Yes, they do. But they also do a lot more. If you look at the left tabs of the Amazon.com website, you will see that they do a lot more than just that. And one of the things they do is they offer free cloud drives to everyone. 5 gigabytes for free. Now 5 gigabytes doesn't sound like much. I mean, most of you probably have a 1 to 2 terabyte drive at home. So what is 5 gigabytes? Well, with the live scribe thing, my students told me that they were able to do at least a whole week's worth of note taking in their classes, and these are students who take about 12 units of classes, calculus, physics, and stuff like that. So the battery will last a whole week, and some students have not used up like 2 gigabytes in half a semester. Yep.
Is it a rechargeable battery?
Yes, they are rechargeable batteries. They're built in, so you basically recharge using a USB cable. Just like the electronic cigarettes, you can recharge with a USB cable. Yep.
I was watching a video yesterday about a new HTC tablet, and like it has like a pen feature on it or whatever too, which is kind of it, but it's an Android tablet. That was pretty neat.
Yeah, HTC, HTC, Motorola, and a few other companies have been sued by Microsoft for infringing on Microsoft patents because of the Android operating system. But Microsoft has not sued Google directly, because I think they want to wage a proxy war on Google. So instead of attacking Google itself, it's attacking all the friendly countries around Google first. And I do not like that a bit. I don't think Google actually has already made an announcement to basically state that it is supporting its own vendors. But in terms of money or lawyers' fees and whatnot, I do not know how Google is handling this whole thing. But Google has expressed that it's not turning a blind eye to this whole thing, and it is going to support its vendors. So that's good, because otherwise, the tablet may not become reality. If the lawsuit goes through and HTC has to fold or something, then it's not going to happen. The pen does have a certain advantage, being it is, the battery will outlast the battery of a tablet. Because my students, and these are students who are taking 12 units of physics classes, calculus classes, and whatnot, and they can, one charge can last a few days at least. And in terms of the encoding, the 2 gigabyte or the 4 gigabyte version can store like half a semester's worth of stuff, which I think is fairly impressive. Yep.
How does the ink work on the pen? Is it like actual ink or?
Yeah, the ink is just regular ink.
Okay.
It's the pen being able to pick up the dots on the piece of paper that makes it able to digitize the movement of the pen, on the paper. And the orientation is not a problem, because I think the dots, the way they lay out the dots, will also kind of figure out the orientation. So it doesn't matter whether you draw something upside down or whatnot, it will still capture it correctly. Yep.
How safe are clouds? Because my physics teacher is telling me he has really big reserves against it. Like, it's dangerous to putting all the information there in a big giant pot, that if it gets cracked, then...
Watch Summer Wars. Well, I think if you're just putting your class notes online, the danger of losing your data is probably not much, because a lot of people have a whole lot more to lose when the cloud storage goes down. So from that perspective, from the reliability or even availability perspective, I think it is better than your own hard drive on your own computer, for sure. Okay, because hard drives do die all day, left and right. And if it is your own computer and you only have one hard drive and you forgot to back up for 2 months, and your hard drive goes down, you lose stuff, over the past 2 months. Over here, I'm pretty sure they do, backup or live backup all the time, and it is not going to be one single hard drive. They have, basically a redundancy thing to make sure that, if a certain percentage of the drives go down, the storage will still be up and running. It might be running slower. So in terms of reliability, this is superior. This is way superior than anything that we can personally purchase. In terms of privacy, I would not expect any privacy at all. Because your content is now stored on, somebody else's, storage device, and that company, in this case Amazon.com, definitely has full access to whatever you store online. Which is why you might want to look into, if you do this, you might want to look at this. It's called GPG, or the GNU Privacy Guard, project. It's basically encryption. Okay, it's an encryption tool, and you can take any file that you have, go through GPG and encrypt it. I think GPG can encrypt 1024-bit, 2048-bit. You can just crank up the encryption level to a level that is high enough for your purposes. I mean, there's no encryption strong enough to stop the government from cracking your files, but most encryption scheme of 1024 bits or more will stop most people from cracking your files. Even the government needs a lot of resources to crack encryption. So unless it has a good reason to crack your files, it won't waste its processing resources on people like ourselves. So if you encrypt the file first before you upload to the cloud, then you also have privacy because they can see your file, but they won't be able to see the content that they are storing in the file because they don't have the key to decipher the content of the file. But since you do, then you can download the file back onto your own computer first, then you decrypt your file to get back to the original content. So when you combine these two concepts, then you can basically use the best features of both. You have privacy, and at the same time you have reliability. But it does introduce one additional step, which is the encryption and the deciphering between the upload and the download. Yep.
What about the encryption? That guy used an insurance file for WikiLeaks. I don't know if you've read it. He had an insurance kind of like a file. It's a 1 gig file. And he encrypted it like one of the most advanced encryption software. And I forgot the name of it. Basically, even the government can't really break into it. But,
does it relate to WikiLeaks?
Yeah. It's kind of like an insurance file saying like if something happens to him, he will release all the information in that insurance, and it's.
Is it Julian Assange?
Yeah.
It's not, well, according to this, he's only using 256-bit encryption.
No, it was a different advanced encryption standard.
Yeah.
I don't know.
Yeah, but it's 128-bit at the time, which is considered, not very strong encryption anymore. There are 3 variants of AES, 128, 192, and 256. I would use, I don't think this is the strongest encryption you can actually have these days. Yeah, GPG offers much stronger encryptions compared to this. Yeah. But that's good to know. Good thing that you brought it up. And this is also widely used in 2001. But basically that's 10 years ago. Whatever was strong 10 years ago is no longer strong because the amount of processing power, according to Moore's law, will double every 18 months. So compared to this time period, it's no longer strong. It is not feasible to crack anything with this number of bits for encryption. But if you use 1024-bit encryption, it will still be fairly strong even by today's standard. Okay, yep.
So it's not really that anything becomes like weaker or stronger, it's just how much processing power it takes to actually decrypt it?
Yes. It is all, no encryption is uncrackable. Okay, all encryption schemes are crackable at some point. It's just that how much time will it take to crack the encryption. It also depends on the time sensitivity of the stuff that you're encrypting. In other words, let's say you're in the military, okay, and you have to send an encrypted message to say, okay, we'll attack dawn tomorrow morning, okay, which is
something that's going to take longer to.
Yeah, anything that would take more than 48 hours to crack is strong enough because by the time 48 hours has elapsed, the attack has already happened. You can decipher the message all you want at that time because it doesn't matter anymore. On the other hand, if you have an insurance policy or something that you want to specify what to do after your death, then that can potentially be decades, and that means you have to use a much stronger encryption because the lifespan of the information is very long, and if anyone has the means to crack it within the decades, they can still utilize the result. So it depends on the lifespan or the shelf life of the information that you're encrypting versus how long it takes to decipher or to crack the encryption.
Does it go the same way when you're encrypting it?
When you're encrypting it, what do you mean?
Does it take longer if you use a?
It takes a little bit longer, but not that much longer. Yeah, when you use 10, the time to encrypt something is proportional to the length of the key of the encryption. So when you use 1024-bit encryption, it is going to be 4 times slower compared to 256-bit encryption. But the time to decipher or to crack it is exponential to the number of bits that you use. So that means it will take a lot longer to decipher a 1024-bit encrypted file compared to a 256.
How long time does it take?
It's exponential. So.
Well, do they have the resources to crack the 256-bit?
Oh, 256, yeah, I think they can crack it. I mean, you can even run a fairly strong computer or a network of strong computers, because the thing about cracking encryption is you can parallelize it very easily. In other words, you can tell 1 million computers, each one not being very strong, and just divide the task of cracking into small portions. So when you have 1 million computers, you effectively have 1 million times the power of one computer to crack the encryption. So that's why encryption is kind of interesting in a way, because if you have access to a lot of computers, you can actually shorten up the time significantly to crack a file.
Do they write an encryption file like in C language?
It's mostly written in C, or assembly, because people do want encryption to go as fast as possible. So most people do not want to use interpreted languages like Perl or PHP to actually do the encryption. Some processors have built-in circuitry to do encryption inside the processor itself. So that part is completely done in hardware, and you have no access to the actual mechanism of encrypting and deciphering.
So as far as decrypting, like let's say the encryption is written in, I don't know, some other language other than C, if in order to decrypt, you have to know the language, right?
No, the encryption schemes like AES, R, SA, and so on and so forth, the algorithm of the encryption and the deciphering algorithm are already published. So you can implement the algorithm in just about any programming language that you want. You can encrypt using a C program and decipher using a Visual Basic program. That's fine, because the algorithm is known. What is not known is the encryption key. So that's the only difference. It's kind of like regular locks. If you use a particular brand of locks, the shape of the key are exactly the same across all the keys. But it doesn't mean that your key can open up all the other locks, because your key has a pattern that only unlocks a particular lock. And it's the same thing with encryption keys. The algorithm, which is corresponding to the standard of the cylinder, of a real lock, that's standardized. But the actual unlock sequence is different depending on which lock you're talking about. Yeah, very interesting topics, I think. And encryption and deciphering, for the most part, is a mathematical, type of research. So anyone who wants to get into encryption and whatnot, really need to have at least a minor degree in mathematics to really become proficient with encryption theory, or cryptography. That's the official name of the study of encryption and deciphering. Okay. Well, let's go ahead and take a 10-minute break, and we'll be back here by 9:32.
Are you familiar with TED.com?
Mm-mm.
It's a great website. It's got short videos of lectures from like the smartest people in the world.